The exact numbers may have still to be found, but all available data indicates a great overrepresentation of one particular political leaning within academia. In 2005, 72% of American college faculty describe themselves as liberal, as in the last video, read leftist, while only 15% are conservative. In more elite universities, think of Harvard, Princeton, etc., that number of liberal identifying faculty even increases as high as 87%. Therefore, people from the political left are vastly overrepresented in the American academy. This, however, was not always the case. According to another study from 1989-90 to 2013-14, the number of far-left liberal faculty members rose from an already quite high percentage of over 40 to over 60%. Centrists, on the other hand, fell from around 40 to below 30%, while far-right conservative members decreased from a meager below 20 to only slightly above 10%. The general population, comparatively, over roughly the same time period, remained largely the same, with moderates comprising 40%, while liberals and conservatives each share around 30%. According to the most comprehensive study on faculty political leanings to date, Gross 2009, progressives outnumber conservatives by 10 to 1 in the humanities and social sciences. The faculty in these certain domains are vastly democratic voters, mostly with views that may be called establishment left, progressive, or status quo oriented. As the author of another study, Mitchell 2018, continues, indeed, faculty political affiliations at 39% of the colleges in my sample, i.e. of top-tier liberal art colleges, are Republican-free. The political registration in most of the remaining 61%, with a few important exceptions, is slightly more than 0%, but nevertheless absurdly skewed against Republican affiliation and in favor of Democratic affiliation. Thus, 78.5% of the academic departments in my sample have either 0 Republicans or so few as to make no difference. 59.8% of faculty in the analyzed liberal art colleges are party registered, and the mean Democratic to Republican ratio across the sample is 10.4 to 1, including 2 military colleges, without which it would further rise to 12.7 to 1. Registered Democrats outnumber registered Republicans in the academic departments of economics, history, journalism, law, and psychology. In most cases, the discrepancies are now higher than in the 2 mentioned previous studies. According to Langbert et al. 2016, a good number of examined departments had no registered Republicans at all, and the more prestigious the university, the higher the mentioned discrepancy. Interestingly, assistant professors are least likely to be Republicans. Thus, discrepancies are lower among the older professors and among higher-ranked professors. the overall ratio of registered Democrats to Republicans in these departments has increased over time from roughly 3.5 to 1 in 1970 to roughly 8 to 1 in 2004 to roughly 10 to 1 in 2016. One of the reasons for this increased discrepancy may be due to three specific mechanisms present in academia. Once the apex of the disciplinary pyramid becomes predominantly left-leaning, it will sweep left-leaners into positions throughout the pyramid, or at least it will exclude vibrant dissenters. At the micro level of a particular university department, no matter where in the pyramid, once it has a majority of left-leaners, it will, in serving, enjoying, protecting, advancing, and purifying sacred values, tend to hire more left-leaners, or at least not vibrant dissenters. There is little evidence of what one would call widespread indoctrination. Rather, college students leave after 4 years with political values and attitudes that are quite similar to those they brought with them. That does not mean, however, that politics doesn't matter. Rather, the willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints and exercise tolerance is predicted by one's exposure to counter-attitudinal messages. And sure enough, support for the First Amendment of the American Constitution, commonly referred to as freedom of speech, i.e., the ability to express dissenting views, is eroding among US college students. Information from additional studies show the predomination of other social groups as well, demonstrating the power of their certain outlook onto the world within the American university system. For example, lesbians and gays are also overrepresented among faculty, especially in social research fields, while non-Christian faiths, particularly Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and self-identified Jews, tend to be overrepresented among faculty, but amount to relatively small numbers for both faculty and the general population. The religiously unaffiliated, atheists, agnostics, religious nones, represent a much larger share and are significantly overrepresented as well. If we only look at social sciences, this overrepresentation for religiously unaffiliated persons is the highest there. We can similarly infer that faculty are likely to hail from cities and the suburbs, and not from towns or rural areas. They instead particularly hail from metropolitan areas along the West Coast or the Northeast Corridor, running from Boston through Washington, D.C. All of this has real-life consequences. Whites from rural and conservative regions are actively discriminated against in college admissions, and conservatives experience a more hostile climate in academia than moderates or progressives. Similar numbers emerge in Europe. Workforce 2019 notes that the professoriate is comparatively more liberal in the powerful fields compared to non-professors, and overall, graduates from the humanities and social sciences may be more left-wing and liberal, professors or not, as compared to other fields. Even if there is the same level of variability within the universities as elsewhere, the mean difference implies that society's intellectuals responsible for teaching the next generation have a more left-leaning orientation than the rest of society. And while we cannot test the theory that conservatives are reluctant to take up an academic career because of their atypical political orientations, the results point to the possibility that universities form an unwelcoming environment to conservatives. Data from Germany shows that university students mainly favor political positions held by the German Social Democratic and Green parties, while the neoliberal and especially conservative party are rated the least. These stances do not alter greatly during the course of their education. This again does not indicate indoctrination, but self-selection and thus accumulation of a homogeneous ideological environment within academia. Regardless of the question of indoctrination, the bastion of creating and spreading knowledge is in its majority deeply biased towards leftism, and thus highly intolerant towards political dissent, as I have shown in the last videos. Therefore, the knowledge produced by this class of experts cannot be fully trusted to be ideologically unbiased knowledge, but rather a flawed interpretation of reality, more in line with its adhered to ideological attitudes than actual reality. Even worse, virtually everyone with influence in politics and big business, in science, in the media and the arts, has to either receive some form of higher education to thrive there, mostly even to just enter and inhabit a meaningful position therein, or be at least sympathetically viewed by the educated, the enlightened members of this leading intellectual class and their progeny in those culture-creating areas in order to gain fame, or even just entry. And because of that, their worldview will rule society by proxy, for the governing men produced or approved by the university system will control nearly all core institutions of the country within they operate by their sheer number inside those places. At worst, they try to shape and dominate the minds of the rest of a nation whose average values they do not share. At least those vital areas of social organization do not represent the real intellectual composition of the population due to the unnatural ideological bent of their reigning majority into just one direction. We have access to plenty of evidence in many fields outside academia, which is indicative for my here presented theory, predicting a strong tilt towards leftism within all institutional systems of the West, academic or not, as I will prove in a future video.